Hello, everyone. As you all know, my name is Anya Vostinar. I teach at Carleton College, and now I'll be discussing some work we've done in putting artificial life into game mods to try and improve evolution intuition. To give you an idea of the outline of my talk, first I'll be talking about why we would do this in the first place, show the proof of concept that we've developed in a game called Stardew Valley, discuss some future directions, and then some questions that I have for you, and I'm happy to answer all of your questions. So to begin, why would we do this? As this group knows, there's a lot of issues with evolution, acceptance, and understanding in the US and across the world. And there's also been several games that have attempted to incorporate evolution into them to varying levels of success. And Spore is probably one that still haunts many of us. Some reasons that those success levels have been varied is that this is actually quite a challenge. The first challenge being accurately portraying evolution via natural selection in ways that doesn't reinforce misconceptions. So a common misconception is that organisms are trying to get certain mutations so that they succeed in the world. And a lot of games that have evolution via natural selection will kind of just reinforce that because the player plays as the organism is trying to succeed. And so if we focus even on getting that done correctly, then there's still these issues of adoption of the game. So we want as many people to play it as possible. Educational games that focus on getting the science correct often then aren't as fun. And so then, students might play it in the classroom, but they won't play it more than they're forced to. If it's developed by an indie game company, they always have trouble gaining attention since they don't have a marketing budget of big companies. And then if we are trying to improve the understanding of evolution within everyone, we might have resistance from those who are opposed to evolution if the game is marketed specifically as containing evolution. And so to meet this last challenge, we are proposing borrowing an idea from political science education called stealth learning, which is when an instructor uses clever or disguised ways to introduce learning objectives through non-traditional tools such as games. And so if we could have a game that wasn't specifically about evolution via natural selection, but just had it as a dynamic, that could contribute to the stealth learning in resistant students, in resistant, general population, anyone who plays the game, by improving their intuition about evolution to then hopefully make them more accepting, more able to understand it in the future. So with all of that in mind, I'm positing that an ideal evolution game would have to correctly implement evolution via natural selection in ways that don't reinforce the misconceptions we know about. It would need to be fun so that people play it without being forced to. It would need to amass a large fan base because we want it to be played by lots of people. We want kids to hear how their friends like it and everything. And then to meet that stealth learning goal, we need to not be overtly about evolution via natural selection and just have it as a mechanic that is in the game. So that's a lot of work. That would be very difficult. And so we're proposing that instead of making a whole new game, we could modify existing games and add artificial life to meet this challenge. So as artificial life researchers, we know that we can instantiate evolution directly in code. We know how to do that. And so we can do that so that it is showing real evolutionary dynamics. We can choose a game that's already fun, that people already like to play. We can choose a game that already has a large fan base, and especially with mods, that fan base often really is excited for every new high quality mod because they want more ways to play their favorite game. And then we can specifically pitch the mod as being, adding realism to the game, which is true. It is making it more realistic. It just also happens to show evolutionary dynamics. So we decided to try this with a game called Stardew Valley. In Stardew Valley, the player is a farmer. They inherit this land and they need to plant crops and make a profit. And off in the corner, you can see that they're making honey. They can raise animals. There's townspeople that they befriend. Lots of different things to do. It's a great game. I highly advise you play it if you haven't played it before. And in addition to all of those things, the player can also fish. There's a number of different species of fish that the player can catch, and these fish have a length property when they're first caught. The game then like completely ignores the length property after the player first catches it, but they do have this. So we decided to target fishing for this for reasons that I'm happy to explain if you're curious. And there are 4 main changes that we made in our mod called realistic fishing. You can see the realism angle that we went for. So we made a persistent population of fish in a data structure so that when the player catches a fish, it's removed from that structure, that permanent population, and that triggers the reproduction of a random remaining fish. So whatever fish are still in the population get to reproduce. We made fish length a property of the fish object so that when the player then goes to sell it, we adjusted the price so that the bigger the fish is, the higher price the player gets. And then we added the ability for players to throw back fish that they catch. So we're kind of envisioning that they would then throw back small fish because they're not high in price. But we also introduced a limit on the number of fish that players can catch to further enforce that they should throw back the small fish and keep the biggest fish if they want to maximize their profits. So you can kind of see that this would then lead to selection for smaller and smaller fish in the population, which then leads to like diminishing returns in player profit over time, which is something we see in real fisheries. So to get to the nuts and bolts of how the evolution works, there's asexual reproduction. We decided not to worry about sexual reproduction. It's not really necessary for our goals. And then the offspring fish, when a fish reproduces, the length is determined as the parent's length plus a random number from a normal distribution with a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 2. So we kind of picked that for making sure that you can see evolution happening in the game in normal time periods. And then there's a maximum and minimum value for the fish length so that things don't get too extreme. And so since there's variation via mutation and there's inheritance of the length, and then there's competition for survival of like which ones the player keeps and which they throw back, this leads to actual evolutionary dynamics of the fish either being pressured to grow to smaller lengths, or the player can purposefully artificially select for certain lengths. So we weren't sure that players would kind of notice what was happening necessarily, so we decided to add an additional thing to draw their attention. So there is a scientist in the town already, which is really great. His name is Demetrius, and players can get, if the fish population grows to be too small on average, the scientist will send the player this in-game mail. Dear player, I was conducting a field study on fish name the other day, and I discovered that the population is in decline. To prevent a fishery collapse, please release any large fish name you catch until the population is stable again. So this was just to really draw attention to like the player that the size of the fish that they're catching is smaller than it used to be. So we've posted this mod and players were able to download it and play it. And we had a number of comments indicating that the mod is indeed realistic. It's, right in the name, so it's not super surprising, but it was cool. No one made any comments about noticing evolution, which is fine since we didn't say that there was evolution in the game. However, updates to the base game have now broken the mod, and so this highlights a problem with doing this sort of modding of commercial games, where you need to keep the mod compatible and functional with the latest version if there's not older versions of the game available to play, which is the case with Stardew Valley. So for future directions, we are trying to identify other games that we could do this in. So the games would need to allow modding, obviously, ideally already be fairly popular, and then ideally have a game narrative with natural elements where evolution via natural selection could fit in well naturally. We don't want it to kind of feel forced. And then we also need older versions of the game to still be playable so that we don't need to constantly be updating the mod for players to still be able to use it. We have identified Minecraft as one game that does meet all of these criteria, and so we're working on developing a data pack for that. And then we also want to conduct the necessary controlled experiments to determine if such a mod is actually effective on improving people's intuition of evolution via natural selection. So with that, I have a number of questions for you all. if you know of any other games that fit the criteria that I listed, I would love to hear them. I'd also love to hear if you know of existing mods that already use artificial life and evolutionary algorithms. And then, as promised, the code for the mod is available there, and my Twitter handle if you would like to follow me on Twitter and discuss this more. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.